Schachter has been the executive director and editor of WGBH Boston Radio since 2015. In that role, he won the 2018 National Edward M. Murrow Award in the investigative reporting category, as well as awards in 2018 and 2017 from the Society of Professional Journalists for Public Service and Investigative Reporting. Mr. Schachter started his career as a state reporter at WBUR in Boston following his graduation from UMass Amherst, then at WFCR New England Public Radio. From there, he worked his way at radio outlets in Los Angeles and Denver, Colorado. Mr. Schachter served as a Middle East Bureau Chief Field Correspondent for the World for 8 years, reporting from Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, covering major events including the Second Palestinian Intifada. Schachter was there when Saddam Hussein was captured from hiding in 2003. His articles have received awards from the DuPont Columbia School of Journalism and the Scripps Howard Institute. There is no doubt that his work is admirable and accomplished in our field. Please join me in welcoming journalist Mr. Aaron Schachter to the podium.
It is really great to be here at a college recognized by peers and students. It's really exciting to see journalism students, especially now. This is a time when we need professionals doing this job, people who are studying it and dedicated to it. And so it's always a real joy to be able to speak to folks. I go to classrooms around Boston and just try and get the word out as much as I can. I got two things up front. I don't know if it's a trigger warning, but I will use the F word twice. Also, it occurred to me after I was listening to WGBH this morning, my radio station, as no doubt all of you were, and the guy on in the morning mentioned that I was giving the speech, Tea with Terrorists, look around the Middle East, and all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, the Middle East? Oh my God, that's really controversial. There are a lot of mixed emotions about things that go on there. This is not a political thing, this is my experience as a reporter there. If you want to ask questions afterwards about some of the political stuff, I'm totally happy to do that. The point of this is to give you a little bit about the experience that I had over there. Also, believe it or not, it's not that long ago, but to kind of look at a simpler time, if you can imagine that. Things have changed quite a bit with some of the groups out there, with what we can do as journalists. And a little bit, what I'd like to talk about is how what I saw out in the Middle East seems to be creeping into our politics and our way of life here in the United States. So to start with, I was, aside from a very brief period where I wanted to be a firefighter, I pretty much always wanted to be a journalist my entire life, as long as I can remember after the firefighter thing. When I was a kid, while other kids were getting K-tel, pop music, and whatever, I was actually getting, I can't even believe it looking back. I was getting records of newscasts. You actually get a record that had famous newscasts on them, and this is one of them that I really loved.
40. This is Trafalgar Square. The noise that you hear at the moment is the sound of the air raid
Anyone know who
siren.
this is? Not you.
I'm standing here just on the steps of St. Martin's in the Fields.
I won the award named after him.
A searchlight just burst into action off in the distance.
No.
One
That's
single
fake.
beam sweeping the sky above me now. People are walking along quite
This
quiet.
is the famous television broadcaster Edward R. Murrow. Hours and hours of great fun listening to him, as you can tell.
It's starting to
Here is
rain
perhaps
again.
one of the
The rain has
most
cracked
famous
up a little
radio
bit.
broadcasts ever.
They backloaded to the ship, but just
The
holding it
Hindu word
just enough to
arrived
keep it
from
from
Germany
It works in the
to
flames. Get it started, It's fighting, and it's fighting. It's fighting terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring fast, and all the folks between us. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 20, 4 or 5 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. It's smoke and it's flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity, all the passengers speeding around it. I told you, I can't even talk to people.
Oh, the humanity. That's kind of the famous phrase that came out of that. So that's what I did as a kid. Somehow I still had friends. My father also had what's called a reel-to-reel tape recorder, which I doubt most of you have ever seen. But if you've ever seen the television show The Goldbergs, you know, it's kind of based on the videotapes that he took in the 1980s. Well, I sort of did that with recordings where I interviewed people, my parents, my grandparents, and things like that. I may or may not have that ever again. I may or may not have those somewhere. To continue, so there was that, and then in high school there was this. That's me working at a radio station at 16 years old. And then fast forward from there to this. This is my beefcake photo. My wife, by the way, begged me not to show you either of those, but I thought, what the heck? Most of us won't see each other again. I was not a great student, though I did have friends, but I really liked learning, and that is really what journalism is all about. It is your license to go out, talk to anyone about anything, and learn stuff. And the most incredible thing that you get to do is what most people don't get to do, right? In my case, eventually, as we'll talk about, I got to go to war zones. But even before that, you get to go talk to famous people. You get to see plays. You get to see movies. I got to pet a baby eagle once, which is pretty darn cool. Although they are very strange looking. So I started here in Massachusetts in a city called Lowell, which is not too far away. Well, everything's far away from here, so I don't know where Lowell is compared to here. But it was an AM radio station. There used to be a phrase that news people chased ambulances. There was police scanner, and I would actually chase ambulances. You hear on a police scanner that the police are going to a certain place, and I would run out with a microphone and interview people, go to burning buildings, election day, concerts, that sort of thing, and it was just, it was pretty spectacular. So my entire life, pretty much, I've wanted to be a foreign correspondent, and I had, after all my travels bopping around from Boston to Denver to LA, back to Denver, I was actually driving out to go fly fishing. And I got a call from the radio program The World saying, oh, hey, you want to go to Jerusalem? And I did one of those, you know, you see on the movies where someone goes, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll think about it. And I hung up the phone and went, woo! And that's pretty much what it was like. It's just an incredible opportunity that I had been waiting for my entire life. I was 35 years old. This was 2002, the early days of the internet, right? And it was kind of hard to find anything online. I found one apartment in Jerusalem online on JerusalemPost.com, and the owner of the apartment said, "Oh, everyone knows where it is. It's right near the cafe that blew up." So that was kind of my introduction to what I was about to face. It was, as Sarah said, the second Palestinian Intifada had been going on for a year. This was August 2002, and America had gone into Afghanistan in October 2001, just about a year after that. So I got there, as I said, at the end of August. Between August and mid-October, I had, this is, by the way, the cafe that was around the corner from me. It didn't look like that anymore, but that was a suicide bombing, killed 11 people. By the end of October, I counted that I had been to 4 suicide bombings. So if it were in Jerusalem, hear a boom, because it's a city of, has anyone been there? Well, it's a city of hills and stone, and so sound travels, echoes throughout the entire city, and so you would hear a boom and you'd run toward it as a journalist. This was a bombing at Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I had a friend who was in that cafeteria when that happened. She was away from it, but and was uninjured aside from the fact that she couldn't hear very well for quite a while. At some point, you know, as when you're new to a place, you go talk to officials there. I went and sat down with the police chief for the Israeli police. You know, Israel's the size of New Jersey, so they have a national police force. The spokesperson for the police sat me down, and he played me a video that, it's one of those memories that's hazy, but I think it was scored to the Beatles, which seems very strange, but he then proceeded to show me 5 minutes worth of scenes much more gruesome than this. And it was just not what any human being should have to see, but clearly his goal was to say, look what monsters they are. So there, within the first few weeks of being in Israel, you get a real hit of us and them, good guys, bad guys, both sides, right? Israelis and Palestinians each see the other, for the most part, as non-people. Not everyone, of course, but that's sort of the narrative that's been set up. So when in early October of 2002, all the 500 journalists or whatever it was in Israel at the time, it was a pretty hot story because the Intifada, woke up to find that overnight Israel had attacked a town in Gaza and killed from helicopters what was initially 12 people. I think 14 or 16 ended up dying. So all 500 journalists that were there raced down to go to Gaza. This is kind of the border that you have to go through. There's all sorts of checkpoint things out here. You walk down this long corridor, and at the other side is a Palestinian checkpoint. It's like an international border. You give them your passport, they check you out, and then you go to the other end, you give them your passport there. Not too long ago, this is on the road, you can see, not too long ago, this was just a road that you could drive down to go get fish or go swimming on the beach, beautiful beaches. But then things got ugly, and this is there. Now there's actually a full-on building, as a terminal, as if you're going to, seriously going to a different country. The way we work as journalists in a foreign country is you get someone called a fixer who translates for you, who sets up interviews in what is generally their hometown or home country. I went down for this funeral with a guy named Josh Mitnick. He had these two sort of dweeby Jewish guys from New Jersey going into this area that was terrifying for two dweeby Jewish guys from New Jersey. And so we got a fixer. There was a guy named Osmi. And because there were so many journalists there, Osmi was full. So Osmi passed us off to his wife's cousin, who was allegedly an English teacher, but his students were not well served. And so Josh and I went down with this guy who barely spoke English, and it was, I mean, again, this was my life's dream to be in a place like this, but it was just terrifying. There were funerals for 12 people, and the way that Palestinian funerals work is bodies are wrapped in shrouds, and they're either carried on people's shoulders like this, or oftentimes on the back of flatbed pickup trucks. You can see others here. And you can see there are thousands of people. In this case, there were tens of thousands of people because there were so many who were killed. And it's hard to explain the terror. This is a street, a fairly narrow street. Those flatbed trucks are blasting either prayer music or somebody with a microphone. It kind of sounds like this. That is gunfire. So this is not, this is television sound from that event in October 2002, but when I was there, what I heard was, we kind of worked out, Josh spoke Hebrew, and Hebrew and Arabic are very similar, and what was being screamed at the time was "Death to the Jews." And Josh and I sort of looked at each other and thought, wait a minute, we're the Jews. And we were both very new, and we were both very scared. And so when we started hearing this, we turned around and ran to try and find our fixer guy who didn't speak English very well. And a man comes running up behind us, and I'm looking back and running, and I mean, as you can see there, you can't run very fast, there's a lot of people. And this man comes up behind us and puts his hand on my shoulder, and I think, that's it. My life ends here. I've been a foreign correspondent for 6 whole weeks, and now I'm dead. He wheeled me around, and remember, this is a year, it's October 2002, a year after we'd gone into Afghanistan. He wheels me around and yells in my face and says, "Fuck Bush!" President Bush. And I was so terrified. I said, yes, fuck Bush! That was it, that's all I wanted to say. We had a little moment with each other, and then moved on. What journalists wanted to do at the time, again, this is the fight between Israel and factions of Palestinian society. We all want to talk to the bad guys, right? The folks that Israel calls terrorists. So Josh and I go with our fixer. We kind of wind our way down these alleys and are led into a room with 8 guys sitting around the wall on low-level mats, and they all have a Kalashnikov at their feet. Most of them have keffiyehs, those scarves, around their face so they can't be seen. And again, we don't really know what's going on because our translator doesn't actually speak English very well. We don't know who these people are. We don't know why we're there. But we sit and listen, mostly in Arabic with translation. Sometimes the person speaking actually got frustrated by the translation that was being offered and spoke English a little bit. And what we did in that moment was tell their side of the story about what happened in the village during the event with the Israelis, and let them tell us, essentially, their side of what was going on in the Middle East. And that's what we would do over and over again. We'd go back and forth to 2 sides that were in an intractable, seemingly intractable situation, oftentimes hating each other, and telling us how bad the other side was. And as I said, I grew up a Jewish kid in New Jersey, and I had some preconceived notions, I would say, about what the situation was about over there. And it's very hard as a human being not to take that with you. And I quickly found that it's important that you hear people out and that you understand where they are coming from. I in the course of reporting there, would talk to what is now the governing body in Israel, Hamas. They were kind of a shadowy underground organization at the time. And so you'd meet, again, you do these sort of crazy things where you'd get in a car and the car would take you to another car and that car would take you to another car. And you'd end up in somebody's living room having tea, as you do, and talking to them about what the situation was like for them. So a year after that, we started talking about, in October 2003, we started talking about going into Iraq. George Bush started talking about going into Iraq, kind of thumping the drums for war. And eventually, that kicked off, and there I am, looking dapper yet again. Believe it or not, the mustache, which is just awful. Saddam Hussein had he sported a mustache, and it sort of became the fashion for men in Iraq. And so, in an effort to blend in, which is comical. Although I was really excited one time when I was standing on a street corner and someone came up and asked me for directions. I don't know how that happened. They asked me in Arabic. As I was leaving Israel to go to Iraq, my friends in Israel said, "Schachter, they're going to kill you." Because of course for Israelis, Schachter is a Jewish name, and Iraq is, I think, the country of terrorists for them. And I couldn't have found a more opposite situation. It was an incredible time. I wouldn't say that it was as built sort of a glorious revolution where people thanked America, but there was a real sense of hope. Saddam Hussein had been a dictator of the country for decades. He was gone. We could, at the time as journalists, go anywhere we wanted, talk to anyone we wanted to, most notably eat at restaurants, which was fantastic. I joke to people that I'm an eater who does a little journalism on the side. This is in front of, I said things were relatively okay, but everything is barricaded. This is the Sheraton Hotel that had been disowned by Sheraton for 26 years. Somehow they got Sheraton placemats, but I don't know how that worked. This is in the green zone where the American coalition had their offices. And this gets at yet another situation of people not understanding each other. And a real reason why what we do is so important. At some point, the American authorities did what they called de-Baathification. Saddam Hussein led the Ba'ath Party, and pretty much everyone who wanted to move up in their stature in life had to join that party. And it was very clear that the American authorities sort of thought of it like Republicans and Democrats, right? Republicans are in charge for one 4-year cycle. Now we're going to give it to the Democrats. But they didn't understand the process, what was going on with that party situation where people were forced to join a party to get ahead. So they made a rule that anyone who had joined this party was not able to participate in the future of rebuilding Iraq. And so what happened is you had a whole slew of technocrats and people who knew what they were doing and governed people of the swamp were kicked out of office just whole cloth. And this created a lot of enmity. It created a lot of division. The other thing that American officials didn't seem to realize is one group is a certain religion, Sunni, other group is Shia. So the Sunnis who ruled the country for so long are now out of power, and Shias start moving in. I think it's hard for Americans who haven't participated in this kind of situation to understand the divisions that exist between cultures in the Middle East, and we'll get to in just a little bit Lebanon, which is just crazy. The irony of what happened here is dictators all over the Middle East, Saddam Hussein, of course, Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and Muammar Gaddafi used to wag their fingers at America and say, you think we're bad, wait till what comes next when we're gone. And the sad irony is that they were right. They held, not condoning dictatorship, but they held their countries together in ways that America trying to rebuild couldn't. This is just a shot of Baghdad. These are two government buildings. This is my fixer in Iraq, a young guy who's about 22 at the time named Ayub. He taught himself, well, he spoke Kurdish because he was Kurdish, he spoke Arabic, he spoke Farsi because his family is from a town in Kurdistan called Halabja, which is when we used to hear stories about Saddam Hussein gassing his own people. These are the people that he gassed. So they all ran into Iran. He also spoke English, German, Turkish, and when I was there, he was trying to teach himself Hebrew for some reason.
And he had a good mustache.
And, well, yes, it's a great mustache. We used to have mustache wars. Clearly, he won. This is McDonald, clearly unafraid of copyright law. The mustache is getting better. This is me at, obviously, a place that sells chicken, but also has a chicken restaurant. One of the best chickens ever, although that's a strange thing to do. This is the famed city of Babylon. I was amazed to find that something as old as Babylon still stood like that. And I said to one of the guides, "It's incredible, how does that happen? Babylon's 2,000 years old," something like that. And he sort of looked at me and said, "You idiot, that's a palace from Saddam Hussein." He remade the palace in the image of what Babylon used to be. I started by saying there were sort of the glorious old days. This is a time when, as I said, we could go all over the country. We could talk to people. We could ask them what they felt about what was going on. We could get kind of first-hand information to the extent that people felt comfortable speaking with us. I assume it's different if you were from Iraq, but things deteriorated pretty quickly. I was there for 6 weeks in the summer of 2003, and then again 6 weeks in the winter for Thanksgiving, for New Year's. And I was scheduled to go back in May, and by the time I was to go back, it was already getting dicey, and we had a BBC correspondent who was detained for 8 hours and questioned, and so they decided that it was not a good idea for me to go back there. Some of you may have heard of the situation with Daniel Pearl, who was kidnapped in Pakistan in 2002 and eventually beheaded. That was an anomaly at the time. It was not something that happened very often or we expected to happen again. And still, by that time, all sides kind of needed journalists to tell their story. Right? It's 2003, 2004. The internet's still kind of in its infancy. Insurgents would speak to journalists. We were kind of seen as a conduit to the rest of the world, which is handy if you're a journalist, that people will talk to you. A few years later, I was sent to Afghanistan. This is a picture from a helicopter, which is pretty stunning. This is Kabul, which looks like a pretty decent city, and obviously the capital. Lovely flower shop. Again, we started with a situation when I first got there where journalists were able to walk around the city to talk to people, to get the message out from the people there, what they wanted, what their hopes were, what their dreams were. We got to talk to people in civil society organizations, women's groups, golf course in Afghanistan. A little dusty, but it's there. They hold, for a little while, they would hold an international tournament every year. I didn't get to go to that. This was an incredible sight in Kandahar. For the first time in decades, girls were getting an education. And again, it's hard to overstate the difference between our culture and the culture there, and having to learn the difference and be able to express it to an audience. And this is what we get to do. This is overseas, a different country, a different culture, but in ways we're constantly doing that with our politics in America. We're visiting parts of America, flyover country, right, that we don't hear from if we're not from the area. This is the legacy of this country. This is an area called the Panjshir Valley. They were a group called the Northern Alliance, which helped America defeat the Taliban, occupy the Panjshir Valley, and this is kind of their trophy case of when they defeated the Soviet Union that was there. So we had Kabul, right? You saw the streets, there was a mall. This is what most of the country looks like. It's very rural, sometimes lacks electricity, certainly lacks running water, sanitation. And so America's, again, sort of stumbling into a country that we don't understand, and in many cases are afraid to go visit. I had, as I said, one visit where I was able to travel around the country. I could walk around Kabul, I could go to Kandahar, walk around, go to the shops, go to restaurants, and then that was it. So this is about 2007, and things got really dicey again in this country. And I had to, this is what's called talc fighting. These are partridges, I believe, and it's kind of a quaint little sport. This is me and the bird partridge market. I'm one of the partridge sellers. Some of these birds can go for $2,500 because they're super fighters. This is me and a friend of mine, ABC TV correspondent Matt Gutman. Between us is a man who wouldn't give us his name, but made it clear he could kill us with his pinky. Presumably a special forces kind of person. So my first embed was with a group of Canadian forces with these guys, and I wanted to play you the story that I did with them.
I'm Lisa Mullins, and this is The World. A bomb hidden in a trash bin killed 12 people today in western Afghanistan. Most of the dead were Afghan police officers. Across Afghanistan, violence has been on the rise as the country prepares for national elections. They're going to be in mid-August. Last month was the deadliest for U.S. and allied forces in Afghanistan since the war began. At least 42 American troops and 23 more international troops died in July, most in the volatile Helmand province, that's in the south. 5 more were killed there over this past weekend. The World's Aaron Schachter spent last week embedded with a team of Army medics working just behind the front lines in southern Helmand.
Army medevac crews spend their week-long shifts at Camp Dwyer in 2 tents on the edge of an airfield. They mainly sleep, read, or watch movies. One soldier recently rigged a projector to his laptop so everyone could watch. That's the movie Transformers 2 in surround sound. The medevac crews are sort of Transformers themselves, called to action in the middle of a movie or in the middle of the night. They throw on their gear and race to the helicopters.
Sorry, that's yours.
A 9 line is literally 9 lines of information on a computer screen, detailing who's hurt, what the injury is, and where the person is on a map. The medevac crews are generally in the air within about 10 minutes.
Clear? It's clear.
In any given 24-hour period, a crew might fly about 3 missions, but last week blew away all the statistics. The crews made several trips to one single small command outpost in the Helmand River Valley called Sharp Amir. In this instance, a crew was called for a Marine, apparently shot in the back.
What's going on? Here you go. He's got bleeding in the left anterior lobe. Okay, dying. He's got minimal eye loss, okay, vision loss. We put an eye patch over it. He hasn't taken anything here. His vitals, he's stable. He's ambulatory. He's talking. No headaches. No shots to the back. No shots to the back. Okay, his back is like stop the rails. Fantastic. Thank you, Joe.
Medic Staff Sergeant Matthew Salek got lucky this time. As it turns out, the initial call was wrong.
Anything else visual in your eyes? Oh, there's anything else visual in your eyes? So that's it. I want you to put this in your eye. All right.
But last week in general was not a lucky one for Salek. 3 of his patients died, 2 Marines shot by Afghan snipers, and an Afghan translator injured by a roadside bomb. The medevac crews also transport Afghans caught up in the fighting, or who are just sick. I went with Salek to pick up a so-called unfriendly, an Afghan shot by Marines. A day later, the helicopter picked up a small boy and his father. The boy had been hit by a tractor. Sergeant Mike Patangan was on that flight. He says Army medics sometimes need to have even more of a bedside manner than regular doctors, especially with locals.
Some of them haven't been in a helicopter before, so you got to take that into consideration. They might freak out sometimes, but all you do is have someone hold their hand or something. It keeps me calmer when I start talking to these guys more. I tell them what I'm about to do, or what I'm doing, what I'm checking. It's sort of a method for me as well to remember everything that I'm doing. Just go step by step.
The other thing complicating the medic's job is that they fly over hostile terrain, so the pilots keep their birds, as the helicopters are known, zigging and zagging. They bob and weave across the landscape on their way to and from the landing areas, known as the LZ. Jay Hanshaw is one of the medevac pilots. He says he rarely spends more than 5 minutes on the ground. Sometimes it's more like 30 seconds. He says it's especially dangerous leaving the landing areas because the enemy knows they're there.
Basically, the enemy's going to know that you're going to come out of there. The direction that we choose to come out of there is not always going to be straight ahead. It'll be to the left or to the right. This kind of keeps the enemies unaware and kind of they can't figure out our patterns. So that's why I'll bank the aircraft, I'll go around houses, I'll mask the aircraft and get the aircraft out of their way and keep us out of harm's way.
Hanshaw did tours in Iraq, as did the medics Patangan and Salek. They say they've seen more wounded and dead in their 2 months in Afghanistan than during their entire time in Iraq. The Taliban have threatened even more violence in the lead up to national elections later this month. There's little doubt that the Army's medevac crews will have their hands full. For the World, I'm Aaron Schachter, embedded with Task Force Talon, Helmand Province, Afghanistan.
So I skipped over the Canadian forces, which is fine, because this is the American Army. The Army, for the most part, is trying, the American military is trying, or has been for nearly 20 years now, trying to work with people in the communities of Afghanistan. And it is very clear that what they're doing is just not working. They will tell us, they will tell journalists that it is just tragic, but it's next to impossible to create any kind of relationship, because they come in, Americans come in, they have to gain the trust of local leaders. This is one of the local leaders. And by the time that happens, their 18-month tour of duty is up, and it has to start all over again with the next person coming in. The Taliban are there forever, right? They live there. And it's, from what the military told me, it's just a really tragic situation. And I guess now the Taliban and the government are having peace talks, so that might lead to something. But it's been a real tough situation, and a lot of it has to do with, don't do this as a journalist, please. That's just stupid. But my point in taking the picture was not me, but this is one of the Afghan police force, which America has been trying to train for this whole time, and it's just not, it hasn't been working out for a variety of reasons. This is a gratuitous picture of what's called a camel spider. I found out that everyone says they can kill camels, which is not true, but it does run 25 miles an hour and it screeches while it's moving. So, sorry, I just love showing people pictures. This is, so I went from Israel, where I lived with my family, to Lebanon. This was a view from my porch, from my back garden, which is pretty spectacular. This is the city downtown, kind of built in French style. This is the monastery that we used to hike up to every day. An election rally ahead of elections. When I got to Lebanon in January of 2008, in May of 2008, Hezbollah blocked off the airport, and sort of a mini civil war started for about 3 weeks. My family and I were told to figure out how we could evacuate the country if we needed to, so we had to start looking into boats and things like that that would help us leave. Lebanon is a really interesting country, and I think an extreme model of some of the things that I'm seeing in the United States. There is a sectarian divide there of, between Sunni, Shias, and Christians. There are 18 officially recognized religious sects, 4 Muslim sects, 12 Christian sects, the Druze, a group called the Druze, and a couple Jews that are left there. This is an entrenched divide between religious groups. Sometimes they join forces against other groups. Sometimes they fight amongst themselves. And it's a really amazing situation because it is such a beautiful country. And there, talk about that in a moment. It's an incredibly educated country. People there speak 3 languages, French, Arabic, English. And somehow the sectarian divides create a scenario where people don't trust one another. There was a civil war there, of course, 15 years, but it's a frightening dynamic that I see tinges of happening now in America. This situation kicked off, and you had neighbors shooting at each other. Literally neighbors shooting at each other. I went to the American University of Beirut after this happened, and there were a bunch of young people hanging out and smoking, and 2 friends were joking about how they shot at each other. One was Christian, one was Shia, one was Sunni. And they just sort of matter of fact said, yeah, every one of us has a gun in the closet, and we had to take it out and shoot at each other. 60 people died, and it kicked off because the government tried to rein in the group Hezbollah. I'm going to play this for you and then come back quickly and start with questions.
I'm Lisa Mullins, and this is The World. I'm Lisa Mullins, and this is The World. Lebanon stepped to the edge of the cliff this past week and then stepped back. Fighters from Hezbollah attacked strongholds of the ruling coalition. More than 60 people died in the clashes. The army has now moved into the battle zones in an effort to keep the peace, but many Lebanese worry that the fighting will resume. World's Aaron Schachter found this report from the northern city of Tripoli.
Lebanese army troops roll through the Tabane neighborhood in armored personnel carriers. Fighting here between Sunni supporters of the governing coalition and supporters of the Shia-led opposition ended this morning. About a dozen people were killed in Tripoli, mostly Shia. But the Sunnis are smarting from their military losses elsewhere in the country. We asked a group of young men whether the future movement of ruling party leader Saad Hariri should continue on the path of politics or build up its weaponry. Their response is unanimous. Fight to the end, they say. Fight to the end, fight to the end. The Sunnis and their allies are armed, but their weaponry pales in comparison with the stockpiles of the Shia Hezbollah movement. Saad Hariri told a news conference today that Hezbollah is trying to take advantage of its recent military gains. Hariri said Hezbollah is demanding that the ruling coalition surrender, that it raise the white flag over Beirut. Hariri said he'll never surrender, but he won't take up arms against Hezbollah either. Hariri's largely Sunni constituency might want to hear tougher talk, given the recent fighting and the disproportionate loss of Sunni lives.
Definitely, people are humiliated.
Mustafa Alouche is a Sunni leader of Hariri's future movement in Tripoli. Alouche says the Hariri family has emphasized building a civil society instead of a militia. He says Sunnis in the street want their leaders to fight back.
What we feel now is that because the future movement, who represents essentially the majority of the Sunnis, did not respond militarily to stop the invasion of Hezbollah, the more fanatic and more extremist groups in the Sunni region will gain real ground in the area.
Lebanon may not be able to stop those extremist groups by itself. It would probably need strong backing from the Arab world and the United States. Representatives of the Arab League are expected to arrive in Beirut tomorrow morning. And as for the U.S., the Bush administration has pledged support for Lebanon's beleaguered government. It's chastised Iran and Syria, and it has sent the destroyer USS Cole back to the region. But some members of the ruling coalition believe the current situation is manageable. Naila Moawad says the future movement may look weak to Sunnis on the street, but is actually stronger for not having responded in kind to Hezbollah's attacks.
Thanks God we did not reply back, because it would have been a civil war. I think today you can rectify that, okay, the resistance has been wonderful, but come, let's talk all together, and your only guarantee is the strong Lebanese state.
Opposition leaders, including some with Hezbollah, have expressed similar sentiments. Everybody, it seems, wants to talk. The problem is all the exhortations for dialogue come with preconditions. The other side refuses to meet. For The World, I'm Aaron Schachter in Tripoli, Lebanon.
So I'm kind of running late, so I'll wrap this up. The point of what I'm trying to say is that these divides that I saw so starkly across the Middle East, in my impression, are starting to infect the politics of the United States. People argued when I was overseas that I shouldn't be talking to quote-unquote terrorists, right? That is sort of an odd, everyone thought the other side was a terrorist. It got to the point where the word was just to be used for people you didn't like, which again is something that is starting to happen in America now. It's a way of dehumanizing the other side, creating an us and a them. And it gets to the point where, you know, people are scared of the them. And so they sort of cocoon with themselves with the us. And that's why, again, what you're doing is so important. Just recently, you probably saw the Harvard Crimson had a situation where student journalists at the paper went to cover an ICE rally, Immigration and Customs Enforcement rally, and sought comment from the agency about what the protest was about, and took heat from student groups for reaching out to them, essentially, to the other side, which of course is standard journalistic procedure. The same thing happened recently with Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, where the newspaper did journalism, and people complained that about what the journalists used the student guide to call people up for comment. That the student journalists took pictures of folks at the rally, which was of course a public rally. It was on a public place. So what we do as journalists, helping people explain the world, bridging the divides between sects or tribes or political groups, is more and more important than it's ever been, I think. And I was really excited this week to see, was it this week you guys created a partnership with Gatehouse? Was that recently?
That's been going on all semester long.
Ah, okay. I looked online and I saw that you guys are getting to do some beat reporting for local news, and it's just a really exciting thing. And I'm so glad that you're kind of getting out into the world already as students. And I want to thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, happy to answer them. Yes?
For example, like when you were Jerusalem, or whenever the situation was, when you hear like a gunshot or like a boom, what's like your thought process, your motivation to get to go to where it's at?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know, I hear a boom or a gunshot and I go toward it. It's, at the time you're trying to tell the story of what's going on, and it was obviously a major part of the story that was going on. I went, as I said, back and forth between people who were, you know, in horrific situations on both sides, and it was kind of a tough thing to do, to constantly be talking to people full of hate. I imagine, you know, for some politics, Asma Khalid, who works for NPR, I think is probably in the same situation. She's going back and forth between, she's kind of doing culture and politics for National Public Radio now, and I think it's getting a similar, no gunfire yet, or explosions, which is good. Yeah.
I know common phenomenon amongst GMTs is that they're stopping the like say just recently with things time after time people that same type has happened to you after your experience being journalist.
The police spokesman who I told you about, who went to hundreds, dozens of suicide bombings, eventually had to stop working because that got too much for him. It was incredibly gruesome. I had very clear PTSD for a period of time. You can understand what goes on because it doesn't affect you the moment you're just doing your job, especially if you're an EMT, right? You've got a whole list of things to do, and then when you stop and think about it, it hits you across the head. I guess it depends what sort of journalism you're doing. Oh, yes.
I have a question about journalistic objectivity.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel that telling both sides of the story creates a false equivalence, and sometimes one side is just a little wrong?
Yeah, especially in the Middle East, it's a really hard balance. I have to be honest and say I had a really hard time with that. And it was a tightrope. And yes, it's a very hard thing to do, especially nowadays. I'm an editor for about 7 reporters, and we have a guy who tries to get in some dig at Trump in every story. And most of the time, it just doesn't That's not what the story's about. They're just trying to get in and get Trump. And so it's a very hard thing to do. Yeah. I don't have a great answer for you. I'm sorry. We wrestle with this in our office every single day. It has to do with the choices of what events you cover, right? You cover. There was a what was it? White Pride rally recently in Boston the last few months, and we struggled with this thing. You know, do you cover these guys who are
The straight pride parade.
the straight pride parade? Yeah. Sorry, I said white pride. No,
Yeah.
straight pride, right? You know, are you? You know, you're giving them what you want if you show up. You're kind of giving them what they want if you don't. It's I'd love to hear you guys talk about it, because I don't have to be an academic. Yes.
As an international correspondent, how often are you filing reports? And like, are you working on the board one thing at a time? And how many days or hours of research and interviews are going into, for instance, one of the ones that you read?
Most of what I did, or much of what I did, because things were so frantic at the time, was I race out at 8 in the morning, you know, go into a bad situation, go home, put the story together, have a drink. Like, that was, you know, repeat. It was just so crazy at the time. It was go, go, go. And one of the things that I came to realize pretty quickly is that I didn't know anything. You know, you think you're a smart person, you go to college, you have little bits of information about things, and you really need to, you know, this is trying to walk a mile in someone's shoes to understand. And so that was it was hard after a couple of years to realize that it had taken me a couple of years to figure out what was going on, or figure out some of the issues that were affecting the situation. And so I did take more time, to your point, to investigate things, to talk to people, to learn, to read more, because it is very, very confusing. In the beginning, I had a friend who was smarter than I was, smarter than I am, asking about the Sunni-Shia divide, and I kept saying, "Will you stop with Sunni Shias? Nobody cares." But of course, that is a huge part of what's happening in this part of the world.
A couple times you talked about taking your family out. Is that a personal choice that journalists make that you can take your family to a dangerous place? Is it people using
Israel and Lebanon are, I mean, it's kind of crazy to say buses were blowing up, but still relatively safe. When I was in Israel, people used to ask me, "Aren't you terrified?" And I thought, what was his name? John Walker Lindh. There's a sniper in Washington, D.C. shooting people at random. That's terrifying. I know it's funny because I watch TV about, you know, what happens in South America, let's say, or parts of Africa, and think, oh my God, it's terrifying. I would never go there. Even as I live in a country that was being portrayed on TV as nothing but dangerous. It just, life is more regular than you would think. And we had friends who would come to visit us, and we'd go sit at coffee shops on either side, in the Israeli part or the Palestinian part, and they'd look around while we were on the patio sipping coffee, thinking, this can't be real, right? Because all they saw on TV was things blowing up, people shooting each other and yelling and screaming. But life goes on.
life goes on? How about
Thank you.